I am Peter Askim. I'm the artistic director of the next Festival of Emerging Artists. This is the last night of our 2020 season. When the pandemic hit, we decided we were going to step right in and provide resources and support and information and a sense of community for everybody we were involved with. So that's our audiences, you, our artists, and our students. And so we've been doing live events since March, paying our artists, which is really important to us, and bringing free events to the public. So this is the final night of our 2020 season. A lot of you now are joining to see Richard Thompson, who is a great, dear old friend of mine and an amazing artist. If you don't know about Richard, you will soon, and he's a legend. He's a fantastic guitarist, songwriter, and through me, I've sort of done a bunch of classical projects with him. So I think every time his management knows that he's doing a project with me, they know he's going to be losing money. But it's really great to work together. Richard is known for his folk and rock music, and he's one of the top 20 guitarists of all time in Rolling Stone. But he's an amazing classical orchestral composer, genre blind, totally. So, hi, Richard.
Hi, hope you can hear me.
Absolutely.
Excellent, good stuff, good stuff. This technology stuff, it's very tricky, isn't
I think we're all learning a lot of stuff that we actually never really wanted to know in
it?
terms
We're
of
all
that.
naive children in this world, but there you go. Good.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thanks for having me on your I can't say on your show. It sounds like Johnny Carson or something. Thanks for
Thanks,
having
I'll be here all night.
thanks for having me in your world. In your world.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Richard, you're known mostly for the kind of folk or rock world, but you and I have collaborated on a number of projects, and with the festival, we actually premiered one of your more orchestral projects, KIA, right? So I wanted to let everybody know about that part of your musical life. So maybe for those of us who don't know Richard and his background, maybe you could just give us the short version of your trajectory and career.
My trajectory. Okay. Well, I grew up in a house without any classical music, really. My dad was a jazz fan, so he had some jazz records. Uh, and classical music was in the background. Growing up in the UK, uh, there's always good radio. The BBC has a dedicated classical channel, but also classical music seeps over into their lighter programming, and so you'd always hear, Maria Callas and Kathleen Ferrier, all these great singers. You'd always hear Gilbert and Sullivan, their kind of light operatic stuff. My parents would take me occasionally when I was a kid to the Royal Albert Hall to see, the big, family spectaculars, the 1812 and the Pearl Fishers and all that kind of stuff. Um, when I got the guitar bug, I started to play rock and roll and folk music. But at the age of 12, I took classical guitar lessons, and I did that for a couple of years. And that was very good for me, and it exposed me to the classical guitar repertoire, which I love then and I love now deeply. But at my school, there were two other kids who were much better classical guitar players than me. So I thought, well, to hell with this. I'm going to go in the rock folk direction. There's less competition. And when I was a teenager, I was in a band called Fairport Convention, which it was really a folk rock band. What we tried to do was to take British, English, Irish, Scottish folk music and play it in a more contemporary way, to play it with electric instruments, with drums and bass, all that kind of stuff, which was controversial at the time. No one had really done that with British music. Bands like the Byrds had done it in the US, but this was new territory in the UK. That was our kind of our mission, really. In some sense, I'm still on that same mission. Um, So I was in that band for 5, 6 years, and I was in a duo with my ex-wife Linda, and then I've been solo really since then. And but to get back to the classical stuff, so when I was 18, I left school, and I went to work for a stained glass window designer. and we had classical music on in the workshop. And there I had a solid year of being exposed to everything, Wagner, all the German stuff, because the other designers were Germans, so we had lots of Beethoven, lots of Bach, tons of Wagner. And if I was lucky that they'd let me play the English composers like Elgar, Vaughan Williams, and I really got to love the Impressionist composers more than anything else. I loved Debussy and Ravel, and I found the echoes of them in the jazz I was listening to as well, in Charlie Parker and John Coltrane. Even people like Big Spiderbeck, were listening to Ravel. Ravel was a great buddy of Duke Ellington, so there was all these connections musically as people pushed the limits of tonal music, of the kind of the major minor tradition before it went to polytonal and 12 tonal, that kind of stuff. So I was in the studio as a teenager, and then in my 20s, and there were often calls to arrange something for a quartet or a quintet, like small groups, frequently brass, sometimes string, sometimes woodwind, and I got very tired with the professional arrangers. I think they really sounded like hacks. And so I tried to teach myself to arrange for these small groups myself, and I've just done that very steadily over the years. Every year or two, I'll just try to do something for a record, and it's usually as an accompaniment in a record. It's not something that's featured, so there'll be a song going on, and then you put a texture in the background, or you put some ideas in the background to improve the song and add to the emotion of the song. And that's my story so far. And then I bumped into Peter Askin at some point. And we have a mutual friend called Danny Thompson, wonderful bass player, one of the great bass players of the last 50 years, as far as I'm concerned, and perhaps as far as Peter's concerned as well. Danny's played absolutely everything, played with everybody from Kate Bush to David Sylvian to Josh White to he was in a band called Pentangle. Just a wonderful, wonderful bass player. And Peter is involved in something called the International Society of Bassists. Yes, there is one. I know it's hard to believe. There's also the same thing for the viola, which is stretching the limits of credibility, but there you go. And Peter said, it'd be great to at our convention next year to feature Danny on something. How'd you like to write a piece that features Danny? So I thought, great. He said, well, we've got a string orchestra sitting there doing nothing. So I thought, great. String orchestra, Danny Thompson, what can go wrong? And they said, well, we'd like something about 6 minutes long. So I thought, well, it's hard to do justice to Danny Thompson in 6 minutes. And so I started to write this kind of multi-sectional piece. It ended up being about 45 minutes long. I'm very bad at following instructions, as you can tell. And it involves songs and singers and a whole slew of other stuff. And I think in the end we ended up with puppets, dancers as the thing evolved. It was just insane and very expensive at the end as well. As Peter said, good way to lose money. So that was fun, and I kind of really enjoyed writing for strings. I'm completely self-taught, really, as an arranger, as an orchestrator. So thank God for Sibelius or whatever else one uses, because at least it gives you some idea of how it's going to sound. It doesn't always sound great, but at least it puts you in the ballpark of what the music is going to sound like. So thank heavens for that. So starting there, then occasionally I was called upon to do some other pieces, and one started out as a commission from British Arts Council, which was a World War I piece called "Killed in Action." Perhaps we'll play a sample from that at some point. and that's basically a string orchestra and just my guitar and voice. More recently, we did a soundtrack for a film called The Cold Blue. It's a documentary film, uh, originally shot by William Wyler, the great Hollywood director, in the 1940s. It's about bomber pilots in 1943. And it was basically shot for the film Memphis Belle, but there was a lot of extra footage that was never used, and it was sitting in the Smithsonian Archive for since the war for 70 years, just sitting there doing nothing. And my friend Eric Nelson found it and restored it very, very cleverly, did digital restoration. And so we did a soundtrack for that. And and that's like a chamber orchestra. That's like horns and horns, clarinet, oboe, strings, percussion. And that's my story so far. And Peter,
That's
what haven't I
great.
mentioned? What
Yeah,
should I?
yeah. Um, I, I think it's really great for everybody to hear a little bit of this music. So maybe we can go back and play through just a few tracks from each project,
Sure.
just so everybody can hear a little bit. And both Cabaret and The Cold Blue are available to buy. So I'll put that link in the chat later on. So Richard can supersize his fries this week.
Oh, lucky me.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and I just wanted to say that Richard had been a real hero of mine, and my partner in crime on this original project was Madeline Crouch, who's crouching in the corner here, but she's on the call too. And I just remember sitting in a coffee shop with her and saying, "Wouldn't it be great if Richard Thompson would write something for Danny Thompson?" And Madeline is a real can-do kind of person, and I said, "He'll never do it. He'll never do it. He's too famous. He'll never do it." And here we are, all these years later. So I think it was a project that somehow really appealed to you, and it was great to work on. And it did turn from a 6-minute song for two people into a 45-minute extravaganza, like we said, with puppets and projections and but super fun. And I think one thing that was interesting is that we did this. People may know, but the South Bank Centre in London puts on a festival where they hire one artist to curate. And Richard, this told me a lot about you, that they give kind of carte blanche to the artist to choose any music that they want to program, right? So maybe you could just talk a little bit about some of the programs that you did for that concert while I queue up some of the tracks from Cabaret.
Okay, I'd be glad to. Thank you, Peter. What do we do? Well, it's a wonderful thing. It's they give you the run of the South Bank, which is 3 venues for a week. So that's like 20. Sorry, I can never add up. 21, events going on, which is lots of fun, and it ranged across many styles of music. Just about everything. We had a guitar night with some legendary electric guitar, electric and acoustic guitar players, and we had some classical things. We had what was it? The Philharmonic, Peter? I can't remember. I think it's the London Philharmonic. Played some Vaughan Williams and some Alan Havanas. We had a string quartet in the smaller room with a wonderful Ollie Coates on cello, playing Shostakovich and Ravel, I think. So it's a very mixed thing. But I mean the run of the South Bank. I mean, who do you want to book? Not a problem. We'll get them. The Alan Havanas thing was interesting because he wrote a piece on the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, and it's a thing that I used to have it on record with who's the narrator? Sorry, I forgot who was narrating it. So I suggested to the to the orchestra, to the Philharmonic, could we do this piece? And they said, well, we can't find the score for it. It's disappeared. It just doesn't exist anymore. So my then wife phoned Alan Havanis's widow and said, any idea where the score is? He said, oh, I've got one. I'll have it copied out for you and sent over. So that's how that piece happened. So it's pretty enterprising stuff.
Yeah, it was just really great to see the breadth of, when you were given full reign, what you chose to program. It was really, really diverse and really interesting.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Indonesian boy band got cancelled. I was looking forward to that.
It's visa problems. It's always visa problems.
Yeah, it was.
So can you just say a little bit about what Cabaret of Souls is about? So this is the piece that was written for Danny Thompson.
Yeah,
and maybe you could just tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it started out as the whole idea was it would be like a bass concerto, and it turned into kind of a Hades Town without the budget in some ways. In fact, Hades Town totally ripped off this piece, just so you know. And they're closed now, but they were doing quite well out of it. So just so you know. So it's it turned into really a musical play set in a kind of antechamber to the underworld, where people kind of pass through and they're waiting to go to heaven or hell basically, and while they're there, of course, they get entertained, and so this rather sadistic person who runs this way station to the afterlife, to taste delight in the inadequacies of the performance and taste delight in parodying them and riposting them throughout the play. And the bass is heavily featured, and there's songs and there's instrumental passages.
I always thought of it a little bit like American Idol in hell.
Yeah, and I think yes, I think that's fairly in the right direction.
Yeah,
it's a bit like American Idol is in hell anyway.
Yeah. Okay, we'll just keep moving on. But you had worked many years with Judith Owen, a wonderful singer, and she was on this project. And we'll hear one of her tracks, and also Harry Shearer, who many of you may know from this is Spinal Tap and a lot of the other Christopher Guest movies, and he's also 23 of the voices on The Simpsons, all of the good ones, by the way. So he was sort of the Simon Cowell character. So let's hear a little bit of sort of the overture of Harry setting the scene as the contestants enter.
Ladies and gents, now we come to the main entertainment for the evening. Bring them in, Malpensio. Come on, we haven't got all day. Can't you get this scum moving a little faster? Here they are, the inhabitants of the underworld. What a multitude of ways they come to death. So they are a little confused. Look at them, still dreaming of their life in the world above. Their hopes, their loves, their dramas. It seems a shame to rouse them from their slumbers, but it's just for a little sport. I think we can persuade them. I can persuade them to sing for you. My colleagues and I may sing a little too. Mesdames et messieurs, sit back, relax, enjoy. Grimper, the first contestant, please.
I haven't heard that for a while.
Yeah, it's a blast from the past. We did forget to say that you're a little on the dark side.
That's a matter of opinion, really.
Didn't you have an album, Gloom and Doom from the Tomb, by the way?
that wasn't my title. That may have been the content, but it wasn't my title.
Right. Well, let's hear another track from Cabaret of Souls, and again, you wrote all of the string parts, and this is a beautiful song featuring Judith Owen called "Her Eyes, Not Mine." Do you want to set this up, Richard?
I can't remember anything about it.
Then I'll take that as a no.
I'm
Let's
sure it's
listen to the
great.
music.
Each little word, each little sigh, how wonderful to be loved, to be loved. That kiss should be mine, that glance should be mine. How can he be so blind? Her eyes, not mine. Her lips, not mine. Her taste, not mine. If he could see me, see the heart that beats inside, no one could give more love than I. One a day I'll make him each little sigh, each little word, how wonderful with her, that richest blue, that painted smile, that lying tongue. Her eyes, not mine.
Curious.
Beautiful, beautiful. That whole show is just full of really amazing tunes in so many different ways, and dark humor, and then the next minute really emotionally kind of devastating. So all of the good buttons that you're pushing.
Yes, yes. So from sad to miserable is what you're saying.
Exactly. And everything in between too, Richard.
There's a few laughs. Come on, there's a few.
So the next project that you mentioned was KIA, which is Killed in Action. Can you talk a little bit about that and the genesis of that commission?
Yeah, sure. So this was something in 2013. I was approached by the Arts Council in the UK to do something for their World War I project, which covered various disciplines. There were artists, photographers, museums. We're dedicating the 4 years to a memorial for the centenary of the First World War, which was a very devastating war for Britain. And so I thought I should write something based on diaries. First of all, I thought letters. You know, there's some wonderful letters written back and forth from the front to home. And you know, I started to research the letters, and I went to the Imperial War Museum in London, and you know, they brought me out all these incredible letters. So still the blood stains on them, you know, with poppies pressed between the leaves. I mean, it's quite heartbreaking. But I realized that the soldiers weren't really saying how they really felt. That they were softening it for their families. And the families, again, weren't really saying what was going on back home. They were softening it for the troops. So I looked at diaries instead. And in diaries, you get much more of the idea of the real horrors of the First World War. You know, there was trench warfare, there was gas. My own grandfather got gassed in the First World War. It was just a horrible, horrific, nasty war. You know, rats everywhere, water in the trenches. You know, snipers, machine guns. I mean, it was really, plus bombardments on a scale never seen before in human history. So people went mad frequently. They just went nuts because it was too much to take. So what I did was I took diary extracts. And I didn't try to rhyme them. I didn't try to soften it. The nearest I get to a rhyme is usually just to repeat a line. Occasionally, I take a poem that someone had written in a letter home, and I would just take that and set that to music. But all the lyric is from World War I diaries, and the music tries to cover the whole experience from recruitment. Through to, you know, arriving at the front line, facing the incredibly difficult conditions, gassing, shelling, you know, trench conditions, rats. There's a whole piece about rats, and just about the last piece in this, I think it's about a 45-minute piece, is the letter from the commanding officer to the family of the soldier who's just been killed, which is it's a tough piece to get through because it really is quite devastating.
Yeah. Let's play a few cuts from that. Maybe we can start with gas. Do you want to set this up?
Yeah, there were two types of gas used in the First World War. There was chlorine gas and was it phosgene? Sorry, mustard gas and chlorine gas. Both really nasty things. And the chlorine gas you could see because it was green. You could see it coming. And everyone has a gas mask with it, but sometimes you got caught unawares. And there are, you know, terrible descriptions. So this song is a terrible description of what happens during a gas attack. And the music tries to capture the sense of drowning as your lungs fill up with fluid. And just the sense of going underwater, and it's quite atonal as well, in the whole piece.
Yeah. Great. So this is Gas from KIA.
The green gas rode like liquid into the trench, filled it up and moved on. We didn't know about gas then. It smelled sweet. It tickled our noses. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then hundreds of men fighting for air. Blind panic, drowning, drowning in the froth of their own lungs. With incredible speed they died. With blackened faces and twisted limbs. Drowning, drowning, drowning.
Yeah.
That's one of the happier pieces, isn't it? Sorry.
But this is so again. This is that was called Gas from KIA by Richard Thompson, and we were really fortunate with the next festival to do the premiere of that piece. This recording is from a performance that we did that Richard did at the Big Years Festival in Knoxville, featuring musicians from Knoxville Symphony. And you were saying, Richard, that when the record plants start up again, that you're planning on releasing this album.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it was kind of about to go when the plant shut down. So hopefully, perhaps the end of this year, beginning of next year, we'll have this recording with the Knoxville Symphony will be available.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that really has always struck me about your music, is that it's far more adventurous than kind of the typical folk rock musician would be, right? So this is very lots of different shades of different influences that we might not expect. And again, you wrote all of this. Another thing that's really amazing is that many kind of crossover artists actually have other people do the writing for them, or do the orchestrating or the notation. So Richard does all of that. Can you just talk a little bit about where this kind of music comes from for you?
I should say that occasionally you do slap my wrist when I do something that's technically impossible or stupid. Thank you for that. What's it come from? I mean, I've always loved 20th century music, really. So when I was at school, we would sing these very atonal things by Benjamin Britten in the school choir, so I really got into Benjamin Britten, Shostakovich. I kind of I like the atonal stuff, and also like that area where classical music kind of retreats back a little bit, and there's a combination of melodic and atonal. So you can kind of color it whichever way you want to, rather than something that's more Schoenbergian. It's just kind of very dense and hard to penetrate. But I think to me all those colors are available, and you might as well use them for different emotional purposes, to push different buttons, if you like.
Yeah, no, it's true. I think music develops to describe realities that didn't exist before. So, yeah, you and I just before this were talking about about Vaughan Williams and about Bartok and the idea of folk music. And Bartok, there's fantastic pictures of Bartok roaming around the Romanian countryside and in North Africa with a big um, wax cylinder recorder. So he was one of the first ethnomusicologists, and
Yeah,
then came back, and that became a big part of his musical language.
absolutely. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
you had the same thing happening in Britain in the late 19th century into the early 1900s. But Percy Grainger, that was an Australian composer, was about the first one in the UK to really exploit the wax cylinder, to actually go around but back in the 60s, you could go into Cecil Sharp House in London, they had all the cylinders there that the Percy Grainger had recorded. It was quite extraordinary. It's amazing to hear those voices, the voices of farmers, ploughboys, singing in 1906. And it's an incredible indication of a world that's really disappeared. And, Percy Grainger, Butterworth, Vaughan Williams, Gustav Holst, that really took an interest in folk music and how it reflected the British culture and the British personality. And they used it to really, I wouldn't say invent, but to almost to proselytize a British school of music, a strong British characteristic in the music, just as Bartok did the same in his world. That has been an important thing. I think Debussy had a conversation with Stravinsky at some point and said you should be putting Russian themes into your music, and I think we now know that in Rite of Spring, although Stravinsky denied it at the time and said that there weren't any, there's about 16 folk tunes in there somewhere. So it's an important thing to give music a national characteristic.
And that's really was your project with Fairport, right from the beginning.
It really was, yeah, absolutely. That was our mission, was to what we thought we were doing was actually kind of building an artificial bridge between the past and the present, and trying to invent almost this new British form of music, but that was based on indigenous folk roots, and to take that to a British audience, and we thought, well, they're going to love this. This is going to be the new thing here in Britain. People are going to forget about American influences, and we're going to be these musical demigods, which didn't quite pan out, but that was the general idea. We also thought we'd be extremely rich and famous, but again, didn't quite happen.
Well, sorry.
Yeah.
There's just a comment that came through, which is really great, and I just thought I would read. Oh my God, that was just amazing. In 1961, as a new student nurse, I took care of a World War I veteran who had been the victim of mustard gas. On X-ray, his lungs looked like the spider webs in a long abandoned house. He had survived, but never really got to live because he spent all those years literally struggling with almost every breath. That was his life's work, just to breathe. Such a powerful piece.
It's true. My grandfather was gassed in World War I, and I mean, he survived, but he was really partially disabled the rest of his life. He could never hold down a real job, so he did kind of part-time jobs the rest of his life. And it was a generation of cripples, people with arms, legs missing. I mean, it was really such a severe effect on Europe, on that generation of Europeans, and then right after that, you had the flu pandemic, on top of that, which killed another 30 million people in Europe. So
Right.
devastating times.
Right. Let's listen to one more from KIA, and this is No Longer. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
This is one of the pieces that's from a poem that I found in a diary. And I didn't change a thing. So it's just a setting of that poem, and it's someone almost resigned to the horror of the war, and almost finding a spiritual meaning beyond it.
No longer bullets whistle singing of death. No longer do I crouch in every hole. No longer do I see men gasp for breath. I pass through death and that has washed my soul.
So beautiful. So
Yeah,
beautiful.
it's hard to sing. It's so emotional. You can hear me cracking up, or it's hard to sing it.
Yeah, yeah. So again, that was from KIA, Killed in Action, and that's from a record that will be released hopefully next early next year.
We hope so.
And we were really fortunate with Next Festival of Emerging Artists to be able to do the premieres of that, and
Yeah, yeah.
that was really amazing. Um, and there's some of the musicians who were on those concerts are here today, so that's really nice.
Fantastic.
So let's talk a little bit about The Cold Blue. So this is a documentary that came out and is now available on HBO. You said a little bit about it before, but maybe just give us the setting for it.
Yeah. So this is footage that was shot by William Wyler, who did some wonderful Hollywood films. So a great director. And he actually flew in B-17s on missions over Germany. One of his cameramen were killed in the process, and all this extraordinary footage, was sitting unseen and unused until Eric Nelson restored it, dug it out, and edited it into this extraordinary piece of film. He also found seven survivors from the 8th Air Force, all in their 90s, extraordinary men who provide the narration for this film. So it's again a very strong emotional effect that this has. Some of the footage is quite disturbing, and it's a great tribute to the extraordinary sacrifice and courage of that wartime generation. No question. Musically, Eric said, "Oh, can you do a score for this? Do something over the weekend. just use guitar or whatever you want to do. I've done scores with Eric before, so sometimes that works for his projects. But for this one, I said, we really need something bigger, where we have to hit a different emotional pattern here. So we used a string quartet, 4 French horns, clarinet, oboe, percussion. And we went to the wonderful Capitol Studios in Hollywood, Capitol Studio B, which has seen some incredible Nat King Cole, Frank Sinatra, Peggy Lee recordings, not to mention Gene Vincent. They call Studio B the Bebopaloola room, which is, I quite like that. And we went in there for a couple of days, and Capitol also has wonderful echo chambers, 30 feet underground, so you get beautiful string sound in there. So everything sounds larger than it actually was. It sounds like there's more musicians playing. And I sort of like the idea that for budget reasons, we could only afford a string quartet as opposed to a whole string section, which would be the normal thing to do for a movie. Your John Williamses, your George Fenton's, you get as many as you can. You get 30 strings, and you get this big, lush sound, and it's, it hits all the emotional buttons. But somehow on this project, it's more emotional to just have the quartet and hear the individual strings speaking. It's different, but to me, it's more effective in this context.
Yeah.
So the strings give a kind of emotional pull. The horns give it something slightly military, slightly patriotic, and the percussion, is inevitably there's a little bit of military snare drum here and there. So just trying to, in one sense, stay out of the way. And in another sense, to try to enhance what's already there. The two difficulties scoring for this picture were that there's a lot of airplane noise, and the planes drone in sometimes in certain keys, and sometimes between certain keys. So you have to kind of keep this in mind. So some cues were written, in A because the planes were in A. And for some of the in-between ones, they actually digitally tuned the airplane drones so that they fit a musical key. So one does what one can.
Yeah, it was the birth of auto-tune. Little known fact. Yeah. So let's listen to the title track, "The Cold Blue." This is the opening. That's gorgeous. That's so gorgeous. Um, and a real, it was such an amazing experience. And
Mm.
those those echo chambers underneath the parking lot really work. It's right underneath the parking lot.
Also, say thank you, Peter, for all the pieces that we've heard. You were the conductor, so thank you for doing such a great job.
Absolutely. It's a total honor. I really mean that. So why don't we finish up? You have a new EP that's coming out tomorrow. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it, and maybe you could play us a preview song from it.
Oh, maybe I could. Well, this is you know, in this isolated world, you know, I've got no live performances until when? Next June, probably. Possibly April, probably June, which is strange. It's strange not to be playing live for such a long time. So I've got a studio here at home, so I thought, well, I'll just make a little acoustic EP, which I did, and that comes out actually tomorrow. It's on Bandcamp, available tomorrow, and I'll be doing on my Facebook page on Sunday. I'll be doing an album preview where I'll play through the whole album launch, I should say, not preview. So. This song's called If I Could Live My Life Again. You know, I can't do nothing for you. You know, I say my piece and then I pound that pavement, always wishing that I could live my life again. Well, I raised some cane and sank some whiskey. Well, I rambled like a man insane. There's arms I've held and hearts I've broken. Oh, if I could live my life again. I hate the four walls of this prison. Those cowards let me take the blame. I swear I'll run with better company. Oh, if I could live my life again. And you know, true love slipped through my fingers. Somehow I never could explain. Next time I'll say just what I'm thinking. If I could live my life again. My sins could be forgiven. That's why I sing this old refrain. That's no more chance is all I'm asking. Oh, if I could live my life again. Could live my life again.
That was great. Wow. Thanks. Then thanks for sharing that
I think I
with
missed a
us.
verse. It doesn't really matter.
Leave them wanting more. Yeah. Um,
Always doing that.
always, always. So that's from your new EP called Bloody Noses, which is
Called
coming
Bloody
out.
Noses, yes indeed, that's what it's called. It's a 6-track EP on Bandcamp, and it's been a great time for writing. I've just written loads and loads and loads of stuff, so I'll be putting more out soon as well. So it's yeah, it's a different kind of creative.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Richard, for taking the time and talking about
Thanks for
this
having me.
music.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think this is music of yours that is just so gorgeous, and people need to know more about it. So I've posted in the chat links to buy Cabaret of Souls and the soundtrack for Cold Blue. Cold Blue is now available for streaming on HBO. I really recommend it, both as a
Great
soundtrack
film.
and as a movie.
Fantastic film. Wonderful.
And also KIA will be coming out hopefully early next year with a performance from Big Ears Festival. So thanks again to Richard for everything. This was really fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for everything you do. Thanks so much.